Story 1. I remember when the number 1 was painted on most signs because gasoline had never been over $1.99. Story 2. 89 cents per gallon. I think. Definitely below $1 per gallon. Mid-1990s when I first started driving. Story 3. 19.1 cents per gallon around 1965. They washed your windows and checked your oil when you filled up at Flying A. Story 4. I remember when gas was priced mostly by the octane rating in cents. 87, 89, 89. The Gulf War caused it to rise to almost $2, then fall back down to around $1.50. Story 5. Not me, but my father said his father paid 10 cents per gallon in the late 1940s. Story 6. $0.27 a gallon. I was 9 years old at the time, 1968, and heard the term gas wars, when nearby stations undercut the competition by 1 cent. Story 7. For some reason, gasoline became very cheap in the summer of 1998 in Littleton, Colorado. I distinctly remember paying 89 cents for a gallon of 85 octane at the King Soopers on Ken Carroll and Sims. Story 8. I cannot even tell you gas prices now. I stopped looking at them years ago. Story 9. Germany, 50 Pfennig would be today 25 cents, equal to $0.29 US. Story 10. Around 1987, while I was in college in the United States Midwest, gas prices briefly reached 69.9 cents per gallon, which was when I had my first car. Technically, I am old enough to remember lower prices from when I was a little kid, but I do not recall any of them exactly. That is the lowest price I have ever personally paid. Story 11. 24.9 cents a gallon. Galveston, Texas, June 27, 1972. Full-service brand name gasoline. Story 12. 25 cents a gallon back in the 1970s. We were all shocked when gasoline went above $1 a gallon. Story 13. Like 80-something cents a gallon. I don't remember exactly. I do remember when it first hit $1 because everyone made such a big deal about it in the 90s. Story 14. Just old enough to know that when the price of gasoline in Canada crossed $1 per liter, we had to get all new signs to accommodate the new price. Story 15. 75 cents as a teenager. But then again, I thought $1 or more was average at the time. Story 16. When we drove down south to Florida for vacation, my parents always got gas at very cheap southern gas stations. I can't remember if the cheapest was 79 or 89 cents. But at home, it was at least $1 or $1.09. So they loved getting gas for under $1. Story 17. 35 to 39 cents a gallon. I remember the man who had the car we rode in asking for quarters for gas. Story 18. 32 cents per gallon in 1993. It was on base, and the first Thursday of every month was tax-free gas day. Story 19. I remember them having to add the 1 manually to the signs when it went over $1. Story 20. 19 cents a gallon during a gas war between 2 independent stations. $4 fill up with a 20-gallon tank. Story 21. Australian here 59.9 cents per liter in the late 1980s. Liquefied petroleum gas was 25 cents per liter, and people were getting conversions done because the price of petrol reaching 65 to 70 cents was a bit much. I was working at a petrol station in about 2004 when it broke and stayed above $1 per liter. Story 22. 10 cents a gallon when gas stations had gas wars back in the 1960s in Los Angeles. Other than that, 25 cents a gallon at Terrible Herbst for premium. Story 23. When I started driving, the price was 98 cents. $10 definitely filled your tank. Story 24. Walked to the store and bought a gallon of gasoline for 25 cents to mow the grass. Story 25. Driving around with my dad in the late 1960s to early 1970s, I can remember prices being 29 to 39 cents. Story 26. In Houston 1969, I paid 9 cents per gallon during a gas war near the University of Houston. Story 27. 19 cents. 2 gasoline stations had a price war, and it bottomed out at 19 cents. The year was 1968, and I filled my gas tank on my Honda S90 for 25 cents. Story 28. I live in a Canadian border town. When I was about 11 years old, I remember my mother being irate that she was paying 14 cents on the dollar in exchange rate and the price of gas was 90 cents per gallon. That would have been around 1987. Story 29. 19.9 cents during a gas war in the 1960s, down from 24.9 cents a gallon. A gas war was when stations were actually in competition for customers and tried to steal customers by dropping prices. Currently, there are about 40 gas stations in my rural county in Nebraska. They usually all sell for exactly the same price, except Shell charges a little more to cancel out their discount card. Story 30. 25 cents per gallon, and my mother would call the gas station and tell them it was okay for me to buy cigarettes for her. I was 7 years old. They had a donkey on the counter, and when you lifted its tail, it would pop out a cigarette. Story 31. 4F S sake. I'm old. I started driving in 2000. Gas was about 90 cents per gallon. My college friends lost their minds when it went over $1. I didn't own a car, so I didn't really care. Story 32. 35 cents, a quarter and a dime, to fill a 1-gallon glass jug to use in the lawnmower. Story 33. Under 50 cents. It was less, but I was too young to understand, except Dad got really mad if I poured it down an anthill and lit it. Story 34. It was definitely under $1 a gallon for a bit during the summer of 1996. I have a specific memory of sitting in traffic coming home from a summer job that I only had that one year and seeing the signs at gas stations. Story 35. Somewhere around $1.25 when I was a kid. I remember it being a huge deal when it hit $2, as my dad was a traveling computer repairman. Story 36. I remember my father taking me along when I was 6 to get gasoline for the lawnmower. He bought me a Coca-Cola from an unlocked cooler in front of the gas station for a nickel and paid 23 cents for a gallon of gasoline. Story 37. 9.9 cents Canadian per liter during the gasoline price competition in Montreal sometime in the mid-1990s. Story 38. The cheapest I remember was 89 cents in the 1990s before I could drive. When I started driving in 2002, it was $1.25 for a few weeks before it started going up. During the Great Recession, I remember the cheapest I paid was $1.33 in March of 2009, but that was when oil crashed to the low $30 range per barrel for a week or two before rebounding. Story 39. When I started driving, you could get it for 19.9 all around the area. Story 40. 42 cents a liter. I remember when my parents swore they would not buy gasoline at over 68 cents a liter. Story 41. My first fill-up ever was 99 cents, and my tank was only 10 gallons, so my fill-up was less than $10. It would have been around February of 2000. Story 42. I refuse to pay 75 cents per gallon for premium gasoline anymore. Story 43. 69 cents a gallon on a trip along Route 66 in 1998. This was somewhere in Arizona. We got very lucky to hit a low gas price period during a road trip from Ohio, and it really helped to stretch money and increase the travel we got to do. I don't think I ever paid attention to gas prices when I wasn't driving, but I got my license in 1990, and this was the cheapest I had ever seen up to that point. I had a car that got 30 miles per gallon, and numerous times I could pay for a week's gas with $5 when I was just in town and going to school or friends' houses. Story 44. I worked at a convenience store and gas station when gas prices first went over $1. This was before pay at the pump was available. People treated me as if I had insulted their mothers and harmed their dogs when they came in to pay. Also, 20-ounce sodas went over $1 at about the same time. Cigarettes went over $2 a pack. Everyone was angry about it. Apparently, I had direct control over pricing because I seemed to take all the blame for it. Story 45. From the United States, born in the late 1980s. I know from looking at the charts that it has been under $1 per gallon in my lifetime, but I cannot remember seeing any two-digit signs. I was an observant little autistic child, and I think a sign with fewer digits would have struck me as notable. I am pretty sure I remember somewhere between $1.00 and $1.09. Story 46. 72 cents per gallon at a raceway in the early 2000s. Two stations were engaged in a gasoline price war. Story 47. I remember paying $1.10 a gallon for 93-octane fuel for my 5-liter Mustang in high school. Story 48. Gas prices in the 1970s were around 50 cents. They have increased significantly now, along with many other things. Story 49. When I started working in North Florida in the mid-1990s, you could drive just over the Georgia border and still get gasoline for 99 cents. Story 50. Modern times, 99 cents a gallon in April 2020. Late 1980s or early 90s, 87 to 88 cents a gallon. Story 51. I remember in the mid-1980s the local gas stations had a mini price war. Prices went down to about 20 cents per liter for quite a while, I recall. Cost me less than $10 to fill up my old car. Story 52. 99 cents per gallon in 2009 at Raceway on Ashley Phosphate Road in North Charleston, South Carolina. $1.29 per gallon at the Marathon Station on Bob Little Road in Callaway, Florida in 2020 at the peak of the COVID-19 lockdowns when oil prices were negative. I remember it being under $1 in rural Arizona in the late 1990s, but I do not recall an exact dollar figure. Story 53. I'm in my 60s, so when I was younger, gasoline was around 75 cents per gallon. I still remember gas stations needing to add a paper $1 bill to the pumps since they did not display enough digits when gasoline went over the $1 mark. Story 54. In the late 1980s in Southern California, I recall being very upset that gas prices increased to 79 cents per gallon. Story 55. The place near me has been out of business for decades but still has the $1.08 price. Story 56. 35 cents for what we called regular, which was leaded gasoline. We did not call it leaded. It was just regular until the new unleaded gasoline appeared. Leaded gasoline has been banned now. Story 57. 15 cents a gallon during gas wars in the 1960s. I remember in the late 1970s gas was 80 cents per gallon, and there were rumors it was going over $1 per gallon. We said no freaking way. Story 58. In the mid-1990s, they used to have a daily segment on the radio in my area that would tell you all the places that had 99 cents per gallon gas that day. I do not think prices have been below $2 per gallon anywhere I have lived since at least September 11, 2001. Story 59. 99 cents in 1999 California. I could keep my car fueled with the change people dropped in my car. Story 60. 17 cents per liter when Canada first converted to the metric system. About 60 cents per US gallon. Or 79 cents per imperial gallon. Story 61. I am quite old and remember driving from station to station looking for cheaper gasoline, because I was not going to pay 50 cents a gallon for gasoline. It was usually around 25 cents in the mid-1970s. Story 62. I remember 79 cents in the mid to late 1980s. It stayed under $1 in my area through the late 1990s, which was nice. Story 63. Gas war at an intersection in Columbus, Ohio in 1969. 19 cents a gallon. It did not last long until prices went back up to the normal 35 cents. Story 64. $0.74 for regular. Story 65. 97 cents mid to late 90s maybe. Was a kid so did not care one bit. Lowest for me as an adult was when I was visiting Texas and paid somewhere around $1.80 per gallon. This would have been around 2013. Story 66. I remember when gas first went up to $1 a gallon and people lost their minds. I think it was in the late 1970s or early 1980s when the United States was having trouble with the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. Story 67. 36 cents a gallon in 1971 for my 1960 Volkswagen Beetle. I remember buying gas at thrifty or Powerine gas stations. Story 68. I remember at the beginning of coronavirus lockdowns, gas in Ontario dropped down to like 62 cents a liter. I do not even remember the last time it was ever that cheap, maybe when I was a child. Crazy. Story 69. Malaysian here. This is our current fuel price. Research octane number 95. 2.05 Malaysian ringgit per liter. 1.84 US dollars per gallon. Research octane number 97. 3.13 Malaysian ringgit per liter. 2.80 US dollars per gallon. Diesel 2.85 Malaysian ringgit per liter. 2.55 US dollars per gallon. Story 70. 81 cents per gallon at one gas station in Long Beach, California in 1996. Story 71. When I got my license in 1973, gas was selling for about 37 cents per gallon. $1 could keep my Volkswagen running for a week. When my father was a kid around 1930, his father ran an Esso station. Across the street was an independent station that tried to undercut him. Esso told him that no matter what price the other guy charged, they would lower their wholesale price so he could charge a penny less. Eventually, the other station closed. I have a picture of him and my father standing in front of the station with signs that say, "Gas war 9 cents. Story 72. 98 cents a gallon in the mid to late 1990s. Premium was approximately $1.20. Story 73. Older adults discussion. I am 36 years old and started driving late. I have only ever owned electric vehicles, so I have never even noticed gas prices. I would probably have to learn how to pump gas. Story 74. I bought a new-to-me car in May 2021. Gas was 73 cents, and it cost me $20 to fill up the tank. Story 75. 45 cents a gallon for regular gasoline. Could cruise all night on less than $5. Story 76. 19.9 cents. 1972. Orlando, Florida. Gasoline price competition between stations. Filled my 10-gallon tank for $2. Story 77. 29.9 cents a gallon for regular and 33.9 cents for premium in 1972 to early 1973. It cost less than $3 to fill a Volkswagen Beetle and about $6 to fill a full-size Ford. Story 78. Before digital signs, they had number placards that would flip up or down depending on the number needed. For a long time, there were only 2 placards next to a decimal, but suddenly 3 were necessary. Many stations had to completely redo their street signage once gas prices exceeded $1 for the first time. Story 79. In the mid to late 1990s, when I was a child, my mother was driving around trying to find something cheaper than $1.49. She finally found a Sunoco gas station at $1.45. However, when we pulled up to the pump, there was an employee on a ladder changing the other side of the sign to $1.49. My mother was not pleased, but she realized that was probably the best price she would find that day, so that is where we filled up. Story 80. I am in Canada, and I remember when people became very upset about the price of gas going over $1. Story 81. Started driving in 1998, and gasoline was 89 cents per gallon. Soda was still 99 cents a bottle except Surge, which was 50 cents. Made $7 something an hour and could cruise around town every weekend and still save money for other fun teenage adventures. Story 82. 76 cents was the price when I was a kid in the late 1990s in the Midwest. I could fill up the dirt bike for under $2. It did not stay that low for long, unfortunately. Shortly after the 1990s, the price went up to over $1, then upwards of $3. About 10 years ago, it went back down to near $1, but that did not last long. At that time, it was around $1.09 per gallon. Story 83. I got my license in the late 1990s and gas was around $1.20 per gallon, maybe even less. When I worked over the summers, I put my paycheck in the bank, rounded down to the nearest $100, and the rest would hold me over for the next 2 weeks, including gas and doing fun things. Story 84. I remember the quick trip across the street from my apartment during my senior year of college, with gas prices as low as 69 cents per gallon back in 1998 to 1999. Story 85. I remember in the 1960s and early 1970s when we drove from Long Island to New Jersey to visit my aunt. We would look for the cheapest gas station because it was cheaper than New York. If I remember correctly, it was about 20 cents a gallon. Story 86. I didn't realize how many people older than me are on here. I remember filling up for the first time when gas was 97 cents. Story 87. I vividly remember seeing $1.09 per gallon at my neighborhood gas station when I first started driving on my own. I got my license in 2017. It was not that long ago. I drive trucks now, and all across the country, I have seen nothing lower than $2 per gallon. I also remember thinking as a kid that I wished we had a diesel engine car because diesel was cheaper than gasoline. Now, as I sit at a Love's offering diesel for almost $4 per gallon, it is quite surprising. Story 88. When September 11th happened, I was in 7th grade. My dad told me to memorize the price of gas. He said it would never be that low again. Story 89. It was definitely under $1 when I was a kid. I remember in my senior year it was up to $1.20 or so, and everyone was upset about that. However, I lived 2 blocks away, so I did not really care. Story 90. 89 cents, 87 octane. 99 cents, 89 octane. 109 cents, 92 octane. Arco gas stations. This is California in 1989. Prices anywhere else at this time would be cheaper. Story 91. 99 cents in 1994 or 1995. It was usually just over $1 when I was a kid. My dad says he remembers when it was 15 cents. His dad would talk about when it was 5 cents. Story 92. I remember during the Gulf War, gasoline was 89 cents. My mom used to tell me, though, that's nothing. Gasoline in her town when she was growing up was 6 cents a gallon. She could fill up her car with pocket change. Story 93. 37 cents. Sometime in the 1980s, I actually bought gas at this price, I swear. Other than that, I can remember 79 cents. Story 94. 8.06 Swedish kronor per liter around 2005. 1 United States dollar is equivalent to 9.49 Swedish kronor. Today, it is about 15.80 Swedish kronor. Story 95. 1972 summer school trip. 19 cents per gallon somewhere in Kansas. Story 96. I have a vivid memory of 99 cents a gallon. This was around 1981 or so. I was 11. Story 97. I remember after September 11th, my family rushing to the gas stations to get gas because it was going to go over $1.09 per gallon. Story 98. I remember leaving summer camp and telling my father that gasoline was expensive in the mountains. He told me that was the new price, 49 cents per gallon. It was 29 cents when I left home. Story 99. In Ontario, Canada, I remember 43 cents per liter in the early 1990s. It was a big deal when the price hit 50 cents per liter for the first time in the summer of 1993. Story 100. My first job was at a gas station where my best friend's father was the manager. At that time, the price of gasoline was around $1.75 per gallon. Then one day it increased to $2.25 per gallon. The outrage from people was quite intense. Story 101. United Kingdom 35 pence a gallon at the station at the end of my school's entrance way back in 1973. Story 102. I worked at a self-service station in the 70s. Gas was 35 cents a gallon. Story 103. $1.14 per gallon during COVID. It was at a Shell gas station, and I got 5 cents off for entering my number for the fuel rewards program. So $1.09 per gallon. Story 104. 99 cents a gallon. I was not old enough to drive, but I remember hearing on the radio people making a big deal that gasoline was becoming $1 a gallon. Story 105. There was a brief dip to around $0.99 per gallon at one point during my junior year of high school from 1998 to 1999. That was unusually low and did not last long. But prices below $1.50 per gallon were common in that period. Gas breaking $2 per gallon was a newsworthy event. Story 106. 95 cents per gallon in Virginia on my drive moving from Boston to San Diego back in 1996. Story 107. High school. The racetrack on my way to school sells gas for $1.28 a gallon. The price rarely changes. Story 108. I filled up my tank in Richfield, Utah for 88 cents per gallon in March 2020. The coronavirus disease disrupted the global economic system so badly that crude oil prices briefly went negative. Oil companies were paying refineries and brokers to store crude oil. Story 109. 30 cents a gallon when I was a kid. The cigarettes in the machine were a quarter. That was a long time ago. Story 110. I remember my parents being upset when it was over $1. Story 111. I swear to God, gas was 79 cents per gallon in Savannah, Georgia sometime around late 2019 or early 2020, but every time I bring it up people say that is wrong. Story 112. 80 cents for leaded gasoline. It was 1992. I was in high school in California, and I drove a 1969 Volkswagen Beetle. I loved that car. Story 113. 17.9 cents per gallon at the L&L station on Chadbourne Street, San Angelo, Texas, in 1970. Story 114. My first job was at my dad's gas station. Within a couple of months of working there, the price went to $1 per gallon, and we had to figure out how to get the mechanical pumps to register it. We ended up cutting the pump price in half, then doubling the total. When I started, I think the price was about 79 cents per gallon. Story 115. $0.279 per gallon back in the 1960s in California. You received blue chip stamps with that, or at Enco stations now Exxon you got a free glass tumbler with a 10-gallon fill-up or maybe 8 gallons. My mom still has those bumpy side glasses. Story 116. $1.81 in March 2020. Far suburbs and borderline rural Midwest. Story 117. When I was a child, I remember it was like 35 cents per gallon in the late 1960s. Story 118. I recall it was about 79 cents when I filled up my Maverick in the early 1980s. That was the car that tended to explode, so the gas price was not the first thing on my mind. Story 119. I remember my dad getting upset when gas reached $1. How quaint. Story 120. 89 cents at the Arco next to the Winter Lodge when I was a kid. Story 121. I remember in the early 1980s it being like 65 to 70 cents a gallon. Story 122. I do not remember the cost per gallon, but I could not get more than $5 of gas in my 1972 Toyota Corolla. Story 123. 79 cents at Quick Trip near Emory and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta in the late 1990s. I remember around that time visiting family in Boston and seeing $1.20 gas, thinking that was a total ripoff. Story 124. When I started driving, I remember gas costing 25 cents. I feel really old now. Story 125. 0.79 and 9 out of 10. That is how my parents said it. I still remember them getting upset when the price went over 1.00. Fill her up with unleaded. Story 126. I'm 66, and as a child road tripping with my parents, I definitely remember seeing gasoline under 25 cents a gallon. I believe I remember 17 cents during what my dad called gas wars, where stations in town would try to beat each other by lowering the prices. Story 127. I remember it being in the 80-cent range when I was a kid, and the first time it hit $1, my mom was very upset at how expensive gas suddenly became. By my second year of college, it was hitting $3 a gallon, and I seem to remember seeing prices in California around $4. I decided I better get my motorcycle license to save money on gas because I was not going to be able to afford driving a car. Story 128. My brother made a homemade mini bike in the late 1960s that was powered by a lawnmower engine. I used to ride my bike to the gas station with a 1-gallon gas can to buy gas. Gas was 24.9 cents a gallon, so a quarter filled the can right up to the rim. Story 129. 39.9 cents per liter back when I started driving. I could fill up my car with $20 and still get change. Story 130. I pumped gas before and after September 11, 2001. That event changed the market. It was 99 cents per gallon before it. We sold a lot during, and then the price increased from there. Story 131. I'm in Canada and the cheapest I remember is 29 cents per liter in the 1980s during a major price war. It was normally around 50 cents per liter. It got close again at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic when it was in the 70 cents per liter range. I remember when $20 was almost a full tank. Now it barely turns the light off. Story 132. It was well below $1 per gallon in New Jersey after September 11th. Story 133. 50 cents per liter in Canada during the first 2 years of COVID-19 quarantine. I could fill my entire tank for only $25. That and the completely empty roads made it a driver's paradise. Story 134. Right after September 11th, gas prices dipped to 69.9 cents per gallon in our region. Story 135. Gas wars in 1970 had gas at one station at 19 cents a gallon. In 1972, the situation deteriorated significantly. The oil embargo occurred, driving oil prices to over $100 a barrel, and gas prices rose to nearly $1 a gallon. Today, oil is at $67 a barrel, and fuel is closer to $3 a gallon. Story 136. $1.74 during the coronavirus pandemic. That same station increased to $5.25 a few years later. Story 137. 33 cents when I was a child, and gas station attendants filled your tank for you. Story 138. Phoenix, Arizona. 25.9 cents per gallon for regular gasoline. 29.9 cents per gallon for high-test gasoline. The year is 1971, I believe. Story 139. 76 cents per liter in Toronto in the fall of 2004. I filled up my Jeep Liberty before taking my young family on a road trip to Boston for United States Thanksgiving. Story 140. I definitely remember 99 cents a gallon in the early 2000s. I think during the peak of the coronavirus disease, it got as low as $1.25. Story 141. I believe it was 99 cents per gallon when I started driving in 1999. Story 142. Under $1 a gallon. But I was too broke for even that. I used to gas up and go at a 7-Eleven that was in a suburban neighborhood near my school. I would just park facing the building, cut through the neighborhood, and get onto the highway in a few minutes. Story 143. 29 cents per gallon. My brother worked at a gas station when I was very young. I am much older now. Story 144. $24.90 per gallon back in 1970 and 1971. Unfortunately, cigarettes were also 25 cents a pack back then. Story 145. 38 cents a gallon. The highest price pumps reached until the late 1970s was 99 cents a gallon. When the price of gasoline went above that, you paid double the total. So if gasoline was $1.20 a gallon, they would set the pumps at 60 cents, and you paid double the total. Story 146. I am 37 years old. 70 cents per gallon was a special promotion for Mark McGwire hitting 70 home runs in St. Louis. Prices were about 89 cents at the time, so it was not a significant discount. However, people still went crazy for it. Story 147. I remember when things reached $2 in the 90s and it felt horrible. Now, we rarely pay for dollars. It is usually more. Story 148. When I was pumping gas as my first job, the price dropped to 39.9 cents per liter. It was usually in the 60s or 70 cents. People would get very upset if it went over 75 cents. Story 149. Remember the gas crisis in 1978. Cars were backed up for blocks at the Hess station, and gas was 88 cents per gallon. Obviously, it was cheaper before that, but that is what I remember. Story 150. 25 cents back in the 1950s. 29 cents when I was driving in the 1960s. Cars got 8 miles per gallon back in those days. Story 151. I do not remember what gasoline cost at the time, but my first job out of high school, which would have been 1981 to 1982, allowed me to drive to work all week on $10 worth of gasoline. Story 152. $1.39 during COVID-19 in North Georgia. That is the one advantage of an economic recession brought on by an unprecedented pandemic, I suppose. Story 153, $1 per gallon. I had a moped in the mid-1990s, and I remember filling it up for like 50 cents. For a kid in middle school, that was a lot back then. Story 154. I paid 69 cents one time after I got my Volkswagen Beetle, either in late 1988 or early 1989, on a Sunday morning. After that, it was mostly in the 80-cent range. Story 155. Around $1.50 to $1.60 per gallon around 2003 when I first got my driver's license. I lived in Middle Tennessee at the time. I remember it averaging cheaper during middle school, between $1.20 and $1.35. What is funny is I remember one year it spiking up to about $1.61 summer and being on the news. Story 156. In the town where I went to high school in Texas from 1993 to 1997, gas was 74 cents. Story 157. In 1998, when I got my first car, I remember gas being 98 cents a gallon and cigarettes costing $1.99 a pack. I lived comfortably with my after-school job, making about $60 a week. Coffee and donuts every day, cigarettes, marijuana, beer, gin, no credit cards. Story 158. In 2014, I filled up my entire tank for $1.77. Not per gallon total. The pump malfunctioned. Pandemic pricing was also very low for a short time. Story 159. Maybe this is just because I need gasoline to get anywhere if I want to, and there would never be a reason for me not to fill up my tank if needed. I have never checked. I am going to get it regardless. Story 160. I remember my father refusing to loan me 50 cents so I could get gas for the lawnmower, make some money, and pay him back the same day. My father was unpleasant. Story 161. In 1997, gas was about 69 cents a gallon in Terre Haute, Indiana, when we were driving home from my in-laws. We filled the car for less than $10. To be fair, the car was my wife's 1991 Ford Escort. Story 162. When I was in high school in 2001, it was always 99 cents. Story 163. I don't remember the absolute cheapest I have seen, but I have clear memories of my mother driving all around town to find the $0.99 per gallon gas when it first went over $1. Even little kid me was trying to tell my mother she was wasting more gas driving around trying to find a deal than she would be saving. Story 164. $0.88 in the 1990s. I could fill up my Honda Civic for about $8. Story 165. 98 cents in 1999. A small town in the middle of nowhere, Illinois. My best friend had just gotten her driver's license and had to fill up her car. I remember her saying how expensive it was for her. If only we could go back. Story 166. Not the cheapest, but in high school, I worked at a gas station when prices first went over $1. The pumps could not go that high, so they were set for half the price, and you had to charge double the readout. People understood, and I do not remember any issues. This was in 1981. Story 167. 98 cents per gallon. There was a Speedway card too, so I think that made it 95 cents per gallon. Story 168. 99 cents is the cheapest I remember seeing. This was around the year 2000. It was a gas station near my grandmother's. They were cutting all kinds of corners, so that is probably why their gas was so cheap. Story 169. Aside from one day in April 2020, when the price was about 90 cents a gallon from empty, I remember prices hovering around $1 in the early 1990s when I was a kid. Story 170. 0.63 pence per kilowatt hour in 2000. It seemed really pricey to keep the flat warm that year, but now it is 10 times that. Story 171. I remember being upset when gas went up to 60 cents per gallon in the 1970s. Maybe a decade earlier, it annoyed me when candy bars went from a nickel to 7 cents, and then, about a month later, from 7 cents to a dime. Story 172. 32 cents in the mid-1970s. With $5, I could fill up the car and have enough money left over for a meal at McDonald's. Story 173, 37 cents. But that was unusual. At the time, it was around 75 to 85 cents a gallon. However, a gas station war 1 week got out of control, and I sat for 30 minutes to fill up that day. Story 174. I worked at a gas station in Ontario in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Gasoline was about $1 per gallon. When the price exceeded $1, the signage displayed the price per half gallon. Later, new signs showed prices per liter. Story 175. $1.13 per gallon. During the senior year 2000 to 2001, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries were fighting and not communicating with each other, so they had no idea how much oil the other nations were producing. Story 176. 98 cents per gallon in the mid-1990s in California. I remember a conversation between my friend's grandparents, who were from Canada, about Canadian gas prices. I believe they were much higher than ours, and ours was likely to be over $1 soon. I do not actually remember gas prices when I started driving in the early 2000s. However, I do remember that $5 bought me a Pizza Hut personal pan pizza and a wild cherry Pepsi for lunch during that time. Story 177. During COVID-19, I bought diesel for 69 cents per liter in Ontario. Story 178. I was just a kid in the late 1970s, so not driving yet, but I remember a story on the evening news about how many old gas pumps could not price gas above $1 per gallon because they only went up to 99 cents. I also vaguely remember gas in Atlanta in the mid-1990s at under $1 a gallon. Was that real or just a freaknik hangover? Story 179. I remember taking a short 5-hour road trip with my parents where gas cost 99 cents. It was probably the early 2000s when gas was regularly over $1, so they were very surprised when we came across it. Story 180. 0.76. Driving from Alaska to Georgia in 1998. This was in Tennessee. Story 181. 85 cents in the late 1980s. I think it was $1.35 or so by the time I started driving in 1999 to 2000. Story 182. I remember when 99 cents was the most I had ever paid per gallon. Story 183. 31 cents a gallon. When I first got my driver's license, I went on holiday around 1975 and drove through the Rockies. Gasoline was 19 cents a liter at my last fill-up. In the Rockies, it was 24 cents a liter, so I only put in $5 because I could get it for 19 cents once we got out of the mountains. Story 184. I don't remember the cheapest, but I do remember my older brother taking me to watch the drag races at Orange County International Raceway in the mid-1970s. He was upset about how much more expensive it was in Orange County than where we lived in San Bernardino. By more expensive, I mean he was angry for having to pay 70 cents per gallon for leaded premium gasoline. Story 185. 0.879 out of 10. I was younger by a bit, so I thought the prices corresponded with the year. Story 186. In the late 1990s, during an oil glut, gas prices fell to 69 cents for regular and 99 cents for premium. Story 187. $0.61. Indiana. I remember driving from South Chicago to Indiana to save money on gasoline. I will try to upload a receipt later tonight. Story 188. I remember the 80 cents and how reluctant they were to break that 99-cent barrier. Story 189. I coasted into a gas station on fumes and filled the tank of my MGB for $2. The tank held about 12 US gallons. The price was 18.9 cents per gallon. Story 190. I remember filling up my car with only $10. The price was probably less than $1 per gallon. Story 191. In 1985, I was 15 years old. I was driving a 1970 Cadillac Coupe de Ville that required leaded gasoline. Leaded gasoline was still available at almost every gas station at that time. Gas typically cost 59 to 69 cents per gallon. Thank goodness it was affordable because that car had a 572 cubic inch engine and a 30-gallon gas tank. You could watch the gauge move when you stepped on the gas. Story 192. 1.81 in Massachusetts sometime under President Barack Obama. and then President Donald Trump got it around 1.95. Story 193. I have seen gas prices fluctuate so much over my life that I do not even remember without looking it up. Story 194. $1.95 per gallon in circa 2004. My car broke down for good just after filling up the tank. The following week, the prices went up over $2 and have not come back since. I siphoned the tank before salvaging the car. Story 195. 24 cents. I could put $5 in my 1968 Firebird and drive all week. I was working at one of the first self-serve gas stations in the 1970s when the price went to 50 cents. People were saying that if it hit $1, they would never buy gas again. Story 196. 89 cents, plus a free National Football League drinking glass of your choice with a 20-gallon fill-up from my area was the Patriots. Story 197. In the 1990s, there was a special Atlantic Richfield company near where I lived. It always had cheaper than usual gasoline and a long line spilling into the street. The cheapest I remember it being was about 20-something cents. Story 198. I was stationed at Keflavik, Iceland in the late 1960s. Gas was 9 cents for regular and 12 cents for high test. Off base, it was close to $3 per liter. Story 199. 1990s when I first started driving. Like $1 per gallon, give or take. Story 200. 61 cents is what it cost the first time I put gas in Dad's truck. That night, he and his brothers sat around discussing how to buy gas in bulk because it had finally gone over 60 cents. Story 201. When I first started driving in 1986 in coastal Southern California, gas was between 89 and 93 cents per gallon. Minimum wage was about $3.15 per hour. Where I live now, Seattle minimum wage is $20.76 per hour. Seattle and coastal Southern California are economically comparable. Minimum wage now being 6.5 times greater than in 1989 would place gas at between $5.86 to $6.13 per gallon at the same rate increase from 1986 prices. It is about $1 cheaper than that here today, so actually gas is cheaper now than in the mid-1980s. Story 202. I once paid 79 cents per gallon in Worcester, Massachusetts in the mid-1990s. That price was preposterous even back then, and it did not last long. Story 203. In 1964, it was 13.9 cents per gallon. In 1980, I thought 62 cents per gallon was cheap, until I realized it was 62 pence per liter. Not so cheap for the time. Story 204. I remember a time in the 1990s when you could buy a tank of gasoline, a Coca-Cola, a candy bar, and Yellow Jackets, also known as trucker meth, for a crisp $20. Story 205. Growing up, the price was always 32 cents a gallon. But occasionally there were gas wars when it dropped to 22 cents in the late 1960s. Story 206. I grew up next door to a full-service station in Ontario, Canada, owned by my uncle's family. In the 1960s, the price was about 35 cents per imperial gallon. Most customers would ask for a few dollars worth. I was jealous of my cousins because they pumped gas in the summer and would get tips, sometimes even a quarter. Story 207. 49 cents in the late 1990s. It was the grand opening of a Wawa location in Delaware, and we were on our way to the beach for vacation. Story 208. I remember when it was $1.02 and my dad was going through the roof over the price. He was livid. Story 209. As a college student, I worked at an advertising agency in Detroit. We managed the Marathon gas account, which was 26 cents a gallon in approximately 1964. Story 210. 76 cents as a special promotion when I was a kid. It was due to a 76 gas station opening day promotion. Story 211. 27 cents in the summer of 1975 in North Florida, just before leaving for Parris Island, South Carolina. Story 212. Probably won't believe this, but in the late 1960s in Louisville, Kentucky, during a gas war, one place had gas for 22.9 cents a gallon. Story 213. Born in 1950, grew up in the Washington, District of Columbia area. I remember the gas wars and prices went to the 7 to 18 cents per gallon range. We were able to take driving vacations to visit relatives in Florida and Texas. Story 214. 65 cents in 1978. 7 pop bottles could fill my motorcycle tank. Story 215. I recall paying around $1.80 per gallon in 2020 or 2021. There is a Tri-Bone gas station in Michigan's Upper Peninsula that typically costs about 30 cents less than anywhere else in Michigan. To be honest, current gas prices are very similar to when I got my license in 2013, at least in the Detroit suburbs, especially when I use my Speedy Rewards card. Story 216. Mid to late 1990s. 99 cents per gallon. For $20, I could fill my car, have lunch, and go to Ronnie's Steakhouse. Story 217. Gas was very inexpensive in the late 1990s. I believe it dropped to 79 cents per gallon at one point. You could fill up a Honda Accord with a $10 bill. Story 218. I filled up for 97 cents per gallon during COVID. Before that, I remember my grandfather complaining about $1.25 per gallon in 1999. Story 219. During coronavirus disease 2019, I was making a lot of money delivering pizza and paying less than $1.50 for gasoline. It helped that I drove a Toyota Corolla. The fuel gauge was less than 20 miles from empty. Story 220. I want to say 0.79, 0.89, 0.99 in the late 1980s. I also remember in the early 2000s when it crossed $2 per gallon, and all the gas stations had to come up with creative ways to update their signs that literally only had room for a 1 in the dollar slot. Story 221. 12 cents a gallon in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, in 1969. Honest to goodness gas war. My dad filled up 3 times in one block. Story 222. 74 cents in 1997. On the first car trip with my older brother when he turned 16, which is how I remember the year we stopped for gas. I had never paid attention to the cost before. I looked at the pump and thought, wow, gas does not cost very much. Story 223. 67 cents around the 1999 to 2001 timeframe. The wife of a gas station owner opened her own gas station directly across the street. They had a husband and wife gas war until she could not financially sustain it and sold to her husband. That was an intense couple of weeks. I hope she divorced him and got the money back. Story 224. Right around 81 cents per gallon back in the early 1980s. A new British petroleum station opened near where I lived in the early 2000s. Gas was around $1.80 to $1.90 per gallon. The new British Petroleum had gas for 99 cents per gallon. The line for gas was huge. It was not worth it for me to wait in line for gas at that price. I do not have the patience for long lines. Story 225. When I first got my license in New York City in the late 1980s, I think it was around $1.39. Story 226. 89 cents. I had $1.75. My sister and I got 2 Whoppers for $1.75 in gas. Story 227. I got my license in the late 1990s and was filling up premium fuel for under $1. We were not too far off in the depths of the global financial crisis briefly. Story 228. $1.15 back in the 2000s when I was very little, around 5 to 6 years old. Story 229. Crazy. 21 cents a gallon during a gasoline price war among several local stations a long time ago. Story 230. $0 when I used to smuggle it across international borders. Story 231. I remember when it hit $1 and people said they would stop driving, and then again at $2 and so on. Story 232. Maybe 1996 when the average price had been about 89 cents per gallon in the town closest to us. In the summer, it dipped down to 75 cents, then 69 cents on down until for a week or so I saw 39 cents per gallon. I really do not know why or how it got so low. I was in high school at the time. Story 233. $0.68. During the height of the pandemic when no one was driving, Des Moines, Iowa. As someone with a fuel-inefficient pickup truck, I was living my best life. Story 234. maybe 39 cents per gallon before the first Arab embargo in the early 1970s. Yes, I am really old. Story 235. $1.10 in Radford, Virginia in 2007. I never really paid attention to gas prices until I had my own car and was starting college. There was a gas station right by my college, and I would put in $5 every week. I commuted, and that got me almost a half tank. Story 236. $0.16 per gallon during a gas war in the 1970s. I filled my dad's truck, which had two 40-gallon saddle tanks and one 20-gallon back-of-the-seat tank, with a camper and drove for almost a week for $16. Story 237. 98 cents in 1998. People lost their minds when it hit $1. Story 238. As an adult, I remember it being 89 cents per gallon when I was driving through Oklahoma in 1995. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.